My husband filed for divorce right after I inherited my dad's fortune. He thought he hit the jackpot, but my dad outsmarted him. Before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe, and also, drop a comment below. What's one life lesson you think everyone should learn before it's too late? Share your thoughts, thanks. My dad always had this way of reading people that made me uncomfortable. He'd sit in his favorite leather recliner in our family room in Oakdale, Tennessee, watching my husband Jake with those sharp blue eyes, like he was solving a puzzle I couldn't see. "That boy's got expensive taste for someone driving a beat-up Camaro," Dad would mutter after Jake left our Sunday dinners. I was 24, fresh out of college, and thought I knew everything about love. Jake was charming, funny, and made me feel like the most important person in the room. What else mattered? Dad worked as a senior accountant at Henderson Associates for 35 years. He drove the same Ford F-150 for a decade, wore shirts until they had holes, and never ordered anything fancier than a cheeseburger when we went out. But Jake always ordered the ribeye steak, the most expensive wine, the fancy dessert, especially when Dad was paying. "Sweetheart," Dad said one evening after Jake had pitched another get-rich-quick scheme involving some app he wanted to invest in, "just promise me you'll keep your eyes wide open." I rolled my eyes. "Dad, not everyone has to live like a monk. Jake has dreams." "Dreams are good, honey. But watch what a man does when money's involved. That'll tell you everything you need to know about his character." I thought Dad was being old-fashioned, maybe even jealous that I'd found someone who wanted more from life than clipping coupons and shopping at thrift stores. Jake made me laugh. He remembered our anniversary. He brought me chicken noodle soup when I had the flu. Wasn't that love? Looking back, I realized Dad saw exactly what was coming. He knew that when real money entered our relationship, Jake would show me who he really was. And Dad was already planning for that moment, long before I even knew it existed. But I was young and stubborn, and I chose Jake's feelings over Dad's warnings every single time. Little did I know, Dad's concerns were about to be proven right in the most devastating way possible. Dad died of a sudden heart attack at 68, right there in his workshop where he'd been building me a bookshelf for my birthday. The paramedics said it was quick, he wouldn't have suffered. But I suffered enough for both of us. The grief hit me like a freight train. We'd had so many conversations I'd never finish, so many Sundays I'd chosen Jake's plans over dinner with Dad. The last argument we'd had was about Thanksgiving. Jake wanted to visit his college buddies in Austin instead of staying home. I'd sided with my husband, and now I'd never have another holiday with my father. Jake was actually wonderful during those dark weeks. He handled the funeral arrangements when I couldn't think straight, organized the reception at Dad's house, and even helped me start packing Dad's belongings. Though I noticed he seemed particularly interested in Dad's gun collection and vintage tools. "Your dad had some valuable stuff," Jake commented, running his hands over Dad's antique woodworking equipment. "This workshop setup must be worth thousands." 3 weeks after the funeral, Dad's lawyer, Mr. Thompson, called me with news that changed everything. "Jessica, I need you to come to my office," he said gently. "There are some important matters about your father's estate we need to discuss in person." I met him at Thompson Associates downtown the next morning. His office smelled like old books and coffee, with law degrees covering every wall. "Your father left you everything, Jessica," he said, sliding a thick manila folder across his mahogany desk. "The house in Oakdale, his retirement accounts, savings, and some investments you probably didn't know about. It's quite substantial." I stared at the numbers on the paperwork, certain there had to be a mistake. The total inheritance was over $750,000. "This can't be right," I whispered. Dad lived so simply. He drove that old truck forever, shopped at Walmart, never took vacations. "Your father was extremely disciplined with money," Mr. Thompson explained. "He'd been saving and investing for decades. He also inherited some money from your grandfather that he never touched. He wanted to make sure you'd be secure." I drove home in a complete daze, the folder sitting on my passenger seat like it contained nuclear secrets. How was I supposed to process this? 3 weeks ago I was grieving my father's death. Now I was trying to understand that I was financially set for life. But what shocked me most wasn't the money itself, it was Jake's reaction when I told him. What happened next would reveal the true man I'd married. At first, Jake seemed genuinely supportive when I shared the news about Dad's inheritance. "Wow, Jess," he said, wrapping me in his arms in our tiny apartment kitchen. "Your dad always knew how strong you were. He wanted to take care of his little girl. You deserve this, babe." His reaction felt so genuine that I was relieved. I'd been worried about how this kind of money might change our relationship dynamic. But within days, Jake started making suggestions. "You know what we should do," he said one morning over pancakes and coffee. He was spreading butter with unusual enthusiasm. Maybe it's time you traded in that old Honda for something nice. You deserve to drive something that reflects who you are now. My Civic runs perfectly fine, Jake, I said, stirring cream into my coffee. I don't need a new car right now. But with the inheritance, we could afford something really good. A Mercedes, maybe. Or that Lexus SUV you always admire in the parking lot at Target. Something about his eagerness made me uncomfortable, but I pushed the feeling down. Maybe he really was just trying to take care of me. Maybe this was his way of helping me adjust to our new reality. Then came the vacation ideas. I found this incredible beach house we could rent in the Outer Banks for the whole summer, Jake announced a few days later, his laptop open to a vacation rental website. Just the two of us. Doesn't that sound perfect? We could both take time off work and just enjoy life. That sounds expensive, I said carefully. So what? You can afford it now. We should live a little while we can. The suggestions kept flowing, a weekend trip to Nashville, season tickets to the Titans, a membership at the country club where his boss played golf. Each idea sounded reasonable on the surface, but something felt wrong about his approach. There was a hunger in his eyes when he talked about spending the money, like a kid in a candy store with someone else's credit card. Jake, I need time to think about all this, I told him during dinner one evening. It's a lot of money, and I want to be smart about it. Smart about it, he asked, his fork stopping halfway to his mouth. Jess, this is our chance to finally live the life we've always dreamed of. Why are you being so hesitant? Because it's not our money, Jake. It's mine. My father left it to me. The words came out harsher than I intended, but they were true. And the look on Jake's face told me everything I needed to know about what he'd been thinking. That's when everything started falling apart. Jake's whole attitude changed overnight. The sweet, supportive husband disappeared, replaced by someone I barely recognized. He stopped bringing me coffee in the morning, something he'd done almost every day of our 3-year marriage. He stopped asking about my day when I came home from my job at the marketing firm. The compliments about how strong I was and how much I deserved the inheritance completely dried up. Jake started sleeping in our spare bedroom, claiming he wanted to give me space to process my grief. But I knew the truth. Jake was angry that I wouldn't let him spend my father's money. The silence in our apartment became suffocating. We'd go entire evenings without speaking, both pretending to be absorbed in our phones or the TV. When we did interact, it was purely functional. Did you pay the electric bill? Or, we're out of milk. Jake stopped doing the little things that had made our marriage work. He left dirty dishes in the sink, knowing I'd eventually wash them. He forgot to take out the trash on collection day. He started working late more often, claiming his marketing campaigns needed extra attention. But I caught him researching divorce lawyers on his laptop one evening when he thought I was asleep. I had no idea that his anger was building into something that would turn both our lives upside down. The tension became unbearable. I found myself walking on eggshells in my own home, afraid that any mention of the inheritance would trigger another cold shoulder treatment. I started eating dinner alone, reading Dad's old novels to fill the silence. One night, I called my best friend Sarah to vent about the situation. He's acting like I personally stole money from him, I told her. Like I'm selfish for not wanting to blow through Dad's life savings on luxury cars and beach houses. Jess, Sarah said gently, have you considered that maybe Jake is showing you who he really is? Your dad never liked him, did he? The words hit me like a slap. Dad had tried to warn me, hadn't he? All those concerned looks and careful questions. All those times he'd gone quiet when Jake talked about money. He'd seen something I couldn't see. Maybe it's time you started seeing it too, Sarah whispered. But I wasn't ready to admit that my 3-year marriage had been built on quicksand. I still hoped Jake would come to his senses and remember that he'd married me, not my bank account. I was about to learn just how wrong I was. The explosion came exactly 1 month after we'd learned about the inheritance. Jake walked into the kitchen where I was making spaghetti and meatballs, his favorite meal, which I'd prepared as a peace offering, and dropped his bombshell without warning. I think we should separate, he said flatly. I set down my wooden spoon and turned to face him. His expression was cold, like he was talking to a stranger instead of his wife of 3 years. Separate, I repeated, certain I'd misheard him. This isn't working anymore, Jess. We want different things. You've changed since your father died. I almost laughed, but the sound came out bitter. Jake, you've been treating me like an ATM for the past month. That's not fair, he snapped, his face flushing red. I was trying to help us build a better life together, but you're too selfish to share anything. You're hoarding that money like some kind of dragon. Selfish? Now I was getting angry. My father just died, and all you can think about is spending his money. He worked his entire life to save that money, and you want to blow it on cars and vacations. Well, maybe if we divorce, we'll both be happier, he said with a shrug, like he was discussing what to watch on Netflix. I stared at him for a long moment. The man I'd defended to my father, the man I'd chosen over family dinners and holidays, was exactly who Dad thought he was. And I'd never once listened to him. That realization shattered my heart into a million pieces. But then something else clicked into place, a memory of Mr. Thompson's office and a folder of documents I'd barely glanced at during my grief. Okay, I said calmly, but there's something you should know first. Jake's eyebrows shot up. He'd expected me to beg or cry or fight for our marriage. He'd probably practiced this conversation in his head, imagining me as the desperate wife clinging to a man who didn't want her anymore. What? He asked suspiciously. I walked to our home office and pulled out the folder from our fireproof safe. It contained all the documents from Dad's lawyer that I'd been too overwhelmed to read carefully. Now I understood why Mr. Thompson had insisted I review everything thoroughly. I returned to the kitchen and slid the folder across the counter to Jake. Go ahead, I said. Read the highlighted section on page 15. Jake opened the folder with the confidence of someone who thought he held all the cards. His face went from smug to confused to pale as he read the words aloud. If my daughter Jessica is married at the time of my passing, she will not receive access to any portion of her inheritance unless and until she is legally divorced. No spouse or third party may claim or access any portion of my estate under any circumstances. The kitchen fell silent except for the bubbling of pasta water on the stove. You mean? Jake's voice cracked slightly. If we divorce, you get the money. Every single penny, I confirmed, unable to keep the satisfaction out of my voice. But if we stayed married, neither of us would see a dime. The entire inheritance would go to the American Heart Association instead. Jake stared at the legal document like it had personally betrayed him. His hands were actually shaking as he reread the highlighted section. Your father planned this, he whispered. He knew. He sure did. 2 years ago, actually. Right around the time you started asking him for loans to fund your brilliant business ideas, remember? Jake's face went from pale to red to pale again. We both knew exactly what I was talking about. The time he'd approached Dad about investing in his buddy's food truck. The time he'd asked Dad to co-sign a loan for his cryptocurrency mining equipment. The time he'd suggested Dad help us with a down payment on a bigger place. Dad had politely declined each request, but I could see now that he'd been taking notes, building a profile of the man I'd married. She'd been studying him like a chess master, planning moves in advance. He trapped me, Jake stammered. He protected me, I corrected. There's a difference. Jake slumped into one of our kitchen chairs, his head in his hands. But I already talked to a lawyer. He said spouses are entitled to half of everything acquired during the marriage. Not inheritance money received with conditions, I explained, feeling oddly calm. Dad's lawyer made sure of that. He researched Tennessee divorce law thoroughly before he wrote this clause. So if I divorce you, I get nothing. Nothing, I confirmed. And if I divorce you, you get everything your dad intended you to have. Jake looked up at me with desperate eyes. Jess, please. I'm sorry. I was just excited about the possibilities. I didn't mean to. We don't have to get divorced. We can work this out. But it was too late. I'd seen who he really was when he thought money was involved. I'd watched him calculate our relationship like a business transaction. I'd felt him withdraw his love the moment I didn't give him access to my inheritance. No, Jake, I said quietly. We can't work this out, because you just proved that you married me for what you thought you could get from me, not for who I am. That's not true, isn't it? You were ready to leave me 5 minutes ago. The only thing that changed was learning about Dad's conditions. Jake opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. We both knew I was right. Dad had seen this moment coming from miles away, and he'd made sure I'd be protected when it arrived. 3 months later, I was officially divorced and $750,000 richer. Jake had tried to contest the divorce terms, but his lawyer quickly explained that Dad's conditions were ironclad. Dad had consulted with estate planning attorneys to make sure every detail was legally bulletproof. There were no loopholes, no technicalities, no way for Jake to claim even a penny of the inheritance. The divorce itself was surprisingly smooth. Jake moved out of our apartment and into a studio across town. He kept his beat-up Camaro, his clothes, and his wounded pride. I kept everything else, including the engagement ring he'd bought me, which, it turned out, he'd purchased with money borrowed from his credit card. Once the paperwork was finalized, I made some changes of my own. I quit my stressful job at the marketing agency where I'd been working 50-hour weeks for mediocre pay. Instead, I started freelance graphic design, choosing my own clients and setting my own schedule. The inheritance gave me the financial freedom to be selective about the work I took on. I sold our cramped apartment and bought a charming cottage in Franklin, just 30 minutes from where Dad used to live. It has a big kitchen with granite countertops, a reading nook by the front window, and a garden where I've started growing the tomatoes Dad always loved. I took that solo trip to Ireland I'd dreamed about since college, the one Jake had always said we couldn't afford. I spent 2 weeks wandering through Dublin and the countryside, eating incredible food and visiting the castles Dad had always wanted to see. Every sunset felt like a gift he'd given me, but the most important thing I did was frame the last photo I'd taken with Dad. It sits on my mantel now, next to a copy of his will. In the picture, he's smiling that knowing smile, the one that used to frustrate me so much. Now I understand what he was seeing. Jake occasionally texts me, usually when he's had a few drinks. He tells me he's sorry, that he misses me, that he realizes he made a mistake. But I know the truth. He doesn't miss me. He misses the money he thought he was going to get. Meanwhile, I'm building the life Dad always hoped I'd have. I'm dating again, carefully, thoughtfully, with the wisdom he tried to give me. I volunteer at the animal shelter on weekends. I host book club meetings in my living room, just like Dad used to host his poker nights. And sometimes, when I'm sitting in my garden with a cup of coffee, I talk to him out loud. Thanks, Dad, I say to the sky. You saved me in more ways than one. I can almost hear him chuckling, pleased that his final chess move worked exactly as he'd planned. He knew Jake would reveal his true nature when money entered the picture. He knew Jake would choose greed over love, and he made sure that when that moment came, I'd have everything I needed to start over. My father always was one step ahead of everyone else. Even in death, he was still protecting me, still teaching me, still loving me unconditionally. Jake thought he'd hit the jackpot when he learned about my inheritance. Instead, he'd walked straight into the most elegant trap I've ever seen. And I couldn't be more grateful.